Hi everyone. I'm trying this one more time because some students had a hard time with accessing the PowerPoints, specifically the narrated PowerPoints. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and go over chapter one again and, give you my spin on the slides and what we're talking about here. Okay, so here we go. And I'll post them on Canvas and then I'll let you all know so you know how to access them. So the first chapter is all about science, right? What is science? How do we do science? How does that have anything to do with biology? So science, scientific thinking, your best pathway to understand the world. So how is that different than superstition, or how is that different than guessing? It's different in the sense that science is empirical. So let's go ahead and continue. When you look, let's see if the learning goals describe what science is. Okay, so you need to know that. The scientific method. So we've already had labs. So now you're going to see, what's a scientific method about. Key aspects of a well-designed experiment. Again, we've had videos in lab where you've seen that. And I also have videos on Canvas. Describe how the scientific method can be used to help make wise decisions. So why is science the best way of knowing our world? And then lastly, the major themes. So when you're going to study, and you should have already done your chapter one homework, but this is for people who did not get the chapter one stuff or had a hard time with the PowerPoints. You really should be thinking about this because these are the important things you need to focus on. And then also when you're doing your homework, you could be going through the PowerPoint and then doing your homework. Okay, so questions asked by scientists. What are some questions? For example, does the radiation released by cell phones cause brain tumors? I hope you've thought about this, right? Does it? Antibacterial soaps, are they better than regular? Are they? Aren't they? How do we know? How do we know what the truth is? Large doses of vitamin C reduce the likelihood of getting cold. You bet people are interested in, okay, what's the best way to keep people healthy? Because it's all about dollars, right? When people are sick, they're staying home, companies are losing money. So these are examples of questions that scientists can ask, and then how they go about with the empirical method or empirical data or empirical process, I should say, to get their answers. So science. Trying to answer what is true, okay? So truth, what is that? Does radiation from cell phones cause brain tumors? If I shave my legs, the hair that grows back, is it coarser? Is it finer? How do we, just everyday questions, and we're trying to get to know the truth. So they show some advertisements, right, by people, by companies. Are those advertisements correct? How do we know? How do we know what is true? So take-home message, through emphasis on objective observation, description, experimentation, science is a pathway by which we can come to discover and better understand the world around us. Okay, these take-home message slides are really important because they summarize the chapter, right? And so I'm not going to read them to you, but I just did, but I won't in the future. All right. So biological literacy. So if you come across something, how do you understand it? How do you assess it? Do you understand what they're talking about? So since this is a general biology class, our goal is that you would have biological literacy. Versus this, right? You look at this, superstition, right? Tarot, reading cards, kissing the ball for good luck, Friday the 13th. What about Friday the 13th? Here's a rabbit's foot. Here are some cookies, right? So fortune cookies. So is this the right way to know our world? Is this how you answer your questions? Or is there a better way? Right? So here, this word empirical, this is an important word. So scientific thinking is empirical. So what does that mean? Based on experience, observations that are rational, testable, and repeatable. Testable is a biggie. Can we test it? Can we measure it? Can we do an experiment, right? And in science, we're talking about that. We're testing stuff. And then is it repeatable? Like if you get something, will you get it again and again and again and again? And if we get it, many times, then maybe we can accept it as true. So here are the steps to the scientific method. And again, if you saw the other PowerPoint, you don't have to worry about this. But so, here in the book, they show it as step by step by step, but it doesn't have to be this way. It can be done out of order. It doesn't have to be sequential. But in this case, we're making it, sequential so you get the idea. But again, babies use the scientific method, right? You use the scientific method. In lab, we're doing labs using the scientific method. So, step 1, making observations. So you observe your world, you observe your natural world, which generally leads you to ask questions. So they should have questions in here, which then leads you to try to answer the question, So for example, one of the questions in the homework, does it rain more on the weekends, right? So observation, it seems to rain more on the weekends. Question, does it rain more on the weekends? Then you formulate a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess to answer your question. It's something that's testable, right? Then if you're interested, and scientists are very interested in many things, you're going to devise a testable prediction, right? If this, then that. Then conduct a critical experiment. With a critical experiment, again on Canvas, we have the videos that I have for you, what's a control group, experimental group, what's a placebo, what are variables, control variables, dependent, independent variables. So you really do need to understand those things. And again, we're doing this in lab, but I want to talk about it here. And then you get your data. Data are numbers, right? What did we measure? What did we see? So does it rain more on the weekend? So we would have the week, and then, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, then Saturday, Sunday. Is it raining more? Can we measure the rain? What if in certain areas, unlike California, it rains during the week too? What, right? So data, you get your results, and then your conclusion, that is where you're analyzing your data. That is where you either accept or reject your hypothesis. Did the data, did it back up the hypothesis, right? And so is this the truth, right? And most of the time, this is a really important point, most of the time scientists are rejecting their hypothesis. Now, if they're rejecting their hypothesis, does that mean that the hypothesis was incorrect? Or yes, it does mean that the hypothesis is incorrect. But if they reject their hypothesis, does that mean that the experiment was pointless? No, of course not. It's still important because we learned something, right? So yeah, most of the time scientists are rejecting their hypothesis. Think about cancer. Think about all the work trying to cure cancer. Now, we have come a long way. We're curing a lot of cancers, but there are still some that we are not doing as well. So there's still tons of research in this area. So again, even though we reject our hypotheses, now we might change our hypothesis a little bit. We might revise our hypothesis and then try a new experiment, okay? So here it says, the scientific method rarely proceeds in a straight line. Conclusions, for example, often lead to new observations and refined hypotheses. Yes, that happens. So the question that they have in your book is, does echinacea reduce the intensity duration of the common cold? So echinacea is an herbal supplement. You can drink it as a tea. You can take tablets. And the question is, well, can it reduce the intensity or duration? So observation. Many people consuming echinacea extracts seem to reduce intensity, duration, symptoms. Okay, so here's the observation. Then it's going to lead us to ask a question and then formulate a hypothesis. So proposed explanation for the observed phenomena. So I said an educated guess to answer your question. So proposed explanation, answering your question to that observed phenomena. So does echinacea reduce the duration or intensity of the common cold? So, or sometimes hypotheses are formatted in if-then statement. So if I take echinacea, then I would reduce the intensity and duration of the cold. Okay. So echinacea reduces the duration and severity of the common cold. So they have a hypothesis. They actually did this. Conduct a critical experiment, right? So usually in an experiment, you have what's called a control group and an experimental group. So this would be like the control group. This would be the experimental. Don't worry about these two groups, okay? Because they did a lot in this experiment, actually. So for the control group and the experimental, everything is the same between the two. Everything except for what you're testing. So those are called control variables. Now it says researchers randomly divided 437 volunteers into 4 groups. Randomly divided, right? So you have males, you have females. You might have couch potatoes, you might have workout buffs. You might have smokers, non-smokers, stressed out people, non-stressed out people. And it's a random, that word random, it's a random sample size of the population. So you have a little bit of everything here, you have a little bit of everything there. Everything should be the same except the treatment. And in this case, what's the treatment? Yes, echinacea, right? So the control group is going to get what's called a placebo. So they're going to get something. And do you think we would tell the control group, hey, you're in the control group? Would we tell them that? No, we wouldn't tell them that. Because if we told them, then, you know, we might get false data, right? The mind is very powerful and they might perceive certain things just on the assumption that they think that they're given, you know, just a sugar pill or they're given the echinacea. So we don't tell them what group they're in. That's called a blind study. The participants don't know what group they're in. The experimental, we give them the actual echinacea, okay? So it says the control group got the placebo. The placebo is a sugar pill. That means we don't expect it to have an effect. The experimental group gets the echinacea. So it says in order to determine if treatment prior to exposure has any effects on the development and duration symptoms, group 1 and 2 receive tablets for 7 days prior to exposure, while group 3 and 4 don't. Again, let's not worry about group 3 and 4. Then treatment. In order to determine if the treatment prior to exposure has any effect, okay, group 1 and 2 receive, okay, we said that. Now, after a week, the scientists are not, how are they going to give people the common cold? Are they going to put them in a room with other people that are sick? No, they wouldn't do that. So it's very deliberate. They actually have like a nasal spray and the virus in the nasal spray. So they're going to give both groups the virus, the cold virus. Then after exposure, the control group keeps getting the placebo. The experimental keeps getting the echinacea. Then we need our results. How are they going to evaluate health and wellness? So it says health evaluation. For 5 days, doctors monitor all groups. So for 5 days, doctors are going to be like, how are you feeling? You know, what are the symptoms? What are the symptoms of the cold? Right? Runny nose, sore throat, itchy throat, cough, sneezing, da-da-da-da-da. So then they're going to compare the two groups. Again, we're just going to focus on these two. Don't worry about these two. So we're going to look at our data, right? And we're going to draw conclusions and maybe make revisions, okay? And then in the conclusion section, accept or reject our hypothesis. So I'm going to go to the data here, the results, okay? Well, what happened was the results were similar between the two groups. Here, conclusion, individuals from all 4 groups are equally likely to develop a cold. Cold symptoms lasted for the same amount of time in all groups. Echinacea had no effect. So if echinacea had no effect between the control group and the experimental group, what are we going to say? Do we accept or do we reject our hypothesis? We would reject our hypothesis, yes? But that does not mean that this study was pointless. We learned something. What did we learn? Yes, right? The echinacea has no effect on preventing or reducing the duration of the common cold or reducing the intensity. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and we're going to continue with another video to continue covering chapter 1.